Hello, everyone. I'm Jason Turvey, the middle-aged revolutionary, and joining me again for an interview is Mandy Clare. Mandy Clare is an independent councillor in Cheshire and also a gender critical activist. Mandy, thanks for joining me.
Hiya.
How are you? All right.
Very good, thank you. Yeah.
Good. Okay, so we're recording this on the 6th of November with the dust still settling on the rather shock election, I suppose would be fair to say, of Donald Trump, re-election of Donald Trump as the president of the United States. Mandy, what are your initial reactions to Donald Trump's rather, I would say, unexpected victory?
I didn't expect it either, because I thought that they'd find a way of making sure that he couldn't get elected, because I feel that there's a very strong push to censor debate, open debate, and censor certain viewpoints as toxic. And it feels as if there's been a kind of consolidation of control within the left, that they've actually managed to masquerade as still a Labour Party or still the Democrats, but that's not that's just a zombie. It's like a walking, it's the Walking Dead. But I think if Elon Musk hadn't bought Twitter, it could have been a different story. I think the fact that there's been able to be open debate about some of the issues, it's made a big difference. And I feel that in a way it's not surprising, because the blandness and the lack of change that the Biden government offered, and then the lies, the just barefaced lies about his state of health, and that just discredits, if you offer people, you promise people change and that you care about them, and you offer that to the working class, and then you just barefaced lie to their faces, you are going to lose credibility and people are going to get fed up. So I think that people were looking for change, and the only change that's realistically on offer on the table is that, isn't it? That's all that's available. But it was really interesting. The other day, I heard Pat McFadden of the Labour Party speaking about this, and he was saying that he thinks that what's happened there and why Kamala Harris has lost out has been because it's people having money in their pockets. That's what matters to people, and that's what's driven it, and that people are really squeezed and feeling it. And for him to say that, when you look at what the new Labour government have already done in terms of damage to the working class, with the rise in tuition fees and the removal of the winter fuel allowance, and all of this talk of investment and change and rebuilding the foundations, it's just kind of empty words. And I think people sense that, don't they? They're not feeling it. They're not feeling any change from it. So
No, that's absolutely right. I mean, I think one of the problems the Democrats had with regard to the cost of living crisis that's affected the entire Western world was that they were in complete denial. They were in
yeah.
complete denial that it was even happening. Um, and there was a tweet from Owen Jones, um, much esteemed man of the left, of course, who said he was in New York talking to, I believe it was a Pakistani Muslim American taxi driver
Oh, I
who
saw
said he
that.
voted for Trump because everything was so expensive.
Mm,
And I mean, in one tweet, that Pakistan Muslim taxi driver nailed it
mm,
far better than Owen Jones has done of late.
mm,
There are working class people in America who have seen prices, as we have over here, exponentially rise. No sign of them coming down. Inflation's slowing, but of course that doesn't mean that prices go down. It just means the rate they go up goes down.
mm, mm,
And they were looking for another way.
mm,
And
mm,
and to be absolutely fair to Trump, he of the two candidates was the only one that even acknowledged that prices had gone through the roof and that
mm,
people were finding it tough. So it's
mm.
precious little wonder that working class people would have looked to him as the alternative, is it?
Mm. I mean, he's talking, his sort of buzzwords are illegal immigrants. That's one of his things that he's
Mm.
talking a lot about. And obviously he talks about freedom of speech, and he's had a go at Kamala Harris about her position on that, being unable to define what a woman is, being able to protect women, even though she is a
Yes.
woman. And it's just kind of, then when he talks about sort of foreign policy, and when he talks about the economy, the things that he's saying, I mean, obviously he's going to promote oil. So the climate enthusiasts aren't going to be happy about that.
Yeah.
He's going to close up the borders, so people on the sort of liberal left, I guess, aren't going to be happy about that. But he has a definite message. And I think because Labour don't and because the Democrats don't, it just leaves this huge vacuum where at least someone is offering something concrete as opposed to nothing at all.
Yeah,
And people are struggling, like you say, so.
yeah. It's. I mean, again, I carry no water for Trump any more than I carry water for Harris. But if Trump's victory told us anything, it's better to promise something you can't deliver than to promise nothing at all.
Mm,
And that's what Harris did.
mm,
Harris spent her 3-month presidential campaign promising the people of America almost nothing at all. And that in a greater or lesser way explains why Trump won.
yeah.
Because although it may be 3/4 of the things he's promising won't come to pass, he's
Mm,
promising them something.
mm,
And I think given the paucity of standout candidates in this election, that's what got him over the line.
I think so. I mean, from my point of view, I get the impression of the man that he does speak what's on his mind. He does say what he thinks. With Kamala Harris, I find her almost impossible to listen to. She comes across as just fake, and she's got that amazing new Labour gift, if you like, of being able to speak and speak and speak and say absolutely nothing at all. But people aren't stupid. I think people are
Mm.
just really sick of that and really fed up of that. And I think what's happened in America now, with people just reaching the end point with their patience with that, is going to happen here next time. And I think we're probably looking at a Farage government as a result. And the left
Yes,
really can only
yes.
blame themselves, and they're not the
Well,
left anyway, are they?
well,
So,
no, of course they're not. I mean, I predicted a little while ago that I could foresee by 2029 some sort of conservative reform hybrid
mhm,
being in charge.
mm,
Something maybe led by Kenny Badenoch, probably not Farage, but maybe Farage, who knows? But certainly some sort of conservative slash reform hybrid government.
mm,
Um, because Labour have already, and we'll move on to Labour fully in a second. But Labour have already started to do the groundwork for their own demise in 4 or 5 years' time, haven't they? By
yeah,
cutting the winter fuel allowance, um, the farmers' land inheritance tax issue,
mm,
which means by the looks of it, I'd have to do a bit more research, but by the looks of it, makes it appear that virtually anyone that inherits a farm from their parents will be liable for inheritance tax.
yeah,
Um, they're real issues, and
mm,
they are essentially what will be the stepping stones to Labour's demise in 4 or 5 years. I think they'll find it very hard, especially if they continue with this blind support for Ukraine, with Trump now elected. And I personally think part of the reason why Trump was put in as president, apart from the fact obviously he won the election, but the fact the ruling class in America wants someone to shut the Ukraine war down, at least
mm,
America's part of
mm,
their obligation in the Ukraine war. And
mm,
a man who's on a 4-year term, who will be leaving at the end of his term, is the perfect person to do it.
mm.
Um, but yeah, Labour apparently sent many people, over 100 people, I understand, to North Carolina to try and get Kamala Harris's
Yeah,
presidency over the line. Good to see that
yeah.
worked out well.
Didn't she bomb on every metric?
Yes,
Pretty
yes, she
much.
did.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
And
I
I just,
believe they focused on sending Labour people, which I also understand has attracted the ire of Donald Trump. Um,
yeah,
but yeah, they sent Labour people to every swing state, and I believe at the time we record it, he's won all of them. Or at least
yes,
he's won everyone that's declared. So
yes, I heard that.
that,
Yeah.
that's the Labour effect in real life in America.
Well,
Sorry, just to finish my thought, it's just you look at the Democrats who since 2016 have been bleating about Russian interference in their election processes, and
mm,
here's the British turning up,
mm,
mob-handed, knocking on
mm,
doors. You can throw a rock in Washington DC and hit a British journalist who's putting output on
mm,
on American media.
mm.
There's there's a darn sight more British interference in the American electoral process than there's ever been from Russians.
Yeah. And there would have been probably even more, wouldn't there, if Trump had not, if Elon Musk had not bought Twitter and then got behind Trump as well.
Yeah,
I was just really, that was what I was surprised about. I thought the corruption was such that it would be possible to fix it basically.
Mm,
So and it was that's the main reason I was surprised. Not I wasn't surprised there was an appetite for him. I was just surprised that they didn't fiddle it to prevent
yeah.
him getting in, you know. And I think it probably was the last chance that we will have had in the world ever to have anything resembling a free and fair election. And I think that if he had not got in, we would have been looking at wholesale industrial level mutilation of children, annihilation of women's rights, what's left of them, and annihilation of free speech. And the definition of LGB, I think all of that would have gone. And you know, Starmer's talking about we're going to fix the fundamentals, you know, in order to sort of build from there and create change. But the fundamentals, if you can't say what a man is, what a woman is, why it matters, if you can't safeguard children on the basis of evidence, you know, what's evidenced and what's not evidence, your fundamentals have already gone out the window, you know. So they haven't got their priorities in order, any of them, and it would have been the end. It would have been the end for however hard any of us are fighting to try and get back to reality and some semblance of common sense on that. It would have been finished. It would have been over, and I was really scared about that. I think a lot of people who are fighting the same fight that I am were as well.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, there's an old, rather crude saying about when America farts, we smell it.
Mm,
And we are downstream of American culture in this country,
mm,
certainly on many other, cultural aspects,
mm,
but most certainly on this gender identity ideology. Now, where it's uh, put the deepest roots is open to debate. I would argue it's mainly in the institutions, so it's the
mm,
academia, media, uh, the judiciary, and things like that. I'm not sure it's got much traction amongst working class people, but it's got roots in the most important places.
mm,
Uh, so it'll be interesting to see over the next few months what will happen, because Donald Trump's gone on record to say from day one he will sign into law the ban on the administration of puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones for children.
yeah.
We will wait with interest to see if he follows through on that. And
Mm,
it's again, if you believe the Democrats and if you believe what constitutes the left in America, President Trump's re-election was a disaster for women.
mm,
But it really does depend on where you come at it from. I mean, the thing that
mm,
needs to be said is that for those that believe that Donald Trump will bring in a federal ban on abortion are completely mistaken. He's never said
mhm,
he'd do that. He has always said he wanted the laws on abortion to be devolved to the states and let the states make decisions for themselves. Um, but what's your view, given what he said about cross-sex hormones and puberty
mm.
blockers for children, but also what he believes with regard to abortion rights?
So with regards to the cross-sex hormones and the sort of indoctrination of children within schools, women having sort of male rapists in their prisons. I mean, they're handing out condoms, aren't they, in the Californian women's
Mm,
prisons? Um, Women being defined by our sex, not by anyone who wants to identify in. I absolutely 100% believe that he will follow through on that, absolutely, because I think he is of the more sort of Christian fundamentalist persuasion. So I think he's a friend of women and children, but from that perspective, from quite a paternalistic, religious, fundamentalist sort of perspective, which obviously isn't that great. Obviously, if you're pro-choice, you know, which I am, I think it's important that women are able to be able to access abortion freely, because if they can't, then they're going to be in a lot more danger. And also, I think there is a point to be made as well about if people want women to have fewer abortions, let's let's make let's make it more rewarding and more secure for women to actually be mothers within society. Let's value motherhood a bit more than we have done in the past. And feminists have been guilty, from my perspective, of not valuing that enough, you know,
mm,
ourselves, I guess, as well through history. So I think I think obviously it's going to be awful for the women who are in a situation where they're going to have to find a way of traveling out of state if their own state obviously blocks it. But none of this is ideal. None of it is at all. We're just in such a mess. And I think if Democrats and if people who consider themselves to be on the left are upset about this situation, again, they just got to self-reflect. The left has never really learned to do that, I don't think. We
No,
have to be
no.
self-critical, and we're not. It's always been a very defensive place to be politically. I work more cross-party now as an independent than I ever did when I was in Labour, and they're easier people to work with. They're not as dogmatic. They are more open to ideas, or discussion or debate. Whereas people who consider themselves on the left, this modern left that we've got now,
Mm,
which isn't very working class, I would say,
no, no.
they're there for different reasons and motivations than, people on the left might have been in the past when it was more working class. So they feel almost like personally insulted and threatened as soon as anybody challenges anything that they believe. It's a
Absolutely.
really
Yeah.
fragile thing, isn't it? I don't know whether you found the same.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, the quality of a politician or someone active in politics even 10, 20 years ago was they could stand on their principles, argue their point, have a discussion with someone, might not necessarily come to an agreement at the end of it, but it's about having a set of beliefs and being able to cogently reason with someone else why you believe that is the
Mm,
case.
mm,
That doesn't happen now.
no.
The modern
No.
left can't argue its way out of a wet paper bag.
No. And especially, we had an example of this today, if I can just share it.
Yeah.
This is really typical. So what happens at the national level within the modern day Labour Party and what happens at the local level politics within the same is it's a mirror image. So today, there's two of us that are well, there's more than two of us that are independents, but there's two of us that particularly push. There's another two other independents who are really not all that proactive at all. Maybe they're more locally based within their wards and they get more involved in ward work than they do pushing back on policy decisions and things like that. So there's two of us that are really quite outspoken, and we really fully take advantage of the fact that we're independents. We're not beholden to anybody. So we can properly represent, people and scrutinize things. And there's nothing to worry about with doing that. We're not going to upset anyone other than people who've got something to hide, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
So this email came around, and it was the other independent councillor that I work closely with was challenging the leadership, or not challenging. They were just asking questions about, our members' budgets as elected members are being approved for town council events and things all the time. Now, the town council have put up the council tax equivalent precept, it's called, isn't it, at that town council level. They've put that up by an awful lot, even though they'd pledged not to as part of their election pledge. And yet they're still coming cap in hand, and they're coming cap in hand to members at the last minute when the event's organised and it's about to take place in 12 hours. So it's obviously paid for. So they don't really need the money from us, but they've got themselves into a habit of coming cap in hand to us,
Yeah.
whereas there's lots of other organizations that maybe don't have grant funding officers or people that are in the know who could benefit from that funding, and there's only a certain amount to go around. So this was queried, and because this person is just an annoyance because they query on things in the same way that I do, the answer that came back, because they'd copied in all 70 Cheshire West and Chester councillors. It's not often that anyone does that, but you can do it. If you feel that it's appropriate, you can make that decision to do it. And they got censured and told in a sharp email came back from the deputy leader, dear councillor, da, 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 would you mind refraining from copying in all of every council on this? There's absolutely no need. And you might want to check your code of conduct to see whether what you're doing is, and it's like,
Yeah.
the tone of it was very rude, and they lose the plot. And I think for the ones that are in more senior positions, it's not just about what they believe that they get needled about when that gets challenged. It's about their position and their career trajectory. They don't like to feel that their authority is being threatened, their
No.
status, or where they're heading, where they're heading to, because they all, as you know, all have it mapped out years in advance, don't they, if they're
Oh
in the
yeah.
upper levels or whatever.
Absolutely.
And in the past, when we used to get that kind of pushback, or when I used to get that, I used to feel quite stressed. My immediate response was stress, and I'd be like, oh. But now, when I get that, I do get that initial like stomach flip. Oh, that's really aggressive. It's really harsh, and it's on an email that everyone's copied into. But I also now I'm a horrible person because I find it quite amusing. I just can't help finding it hilarious. So, But
Yeah. So I mean, well, I mean, saying about being horrible, maybe it comes as as one gets a little older. But one of the things that I have enjoyed about Trump's election, and again, I have to emphasise because the modern left will not believe me if I say this, I carry no water for Donald Trump.
mm,
But the reaction of the liberal left in America to his election has been absolutely hilarious,
yeah.
and I've enjoyed every living minute of it. Because they've gone into complete meltdown. So,
Yeah.
so in essence, what they have done, almost to a man and a woman, is to say that Kamala Harris's campaign was 100% perfect.
Mm,
There's just that all the American voters are racist, sexist, thisist, thatist. That's
mm-hmm,
why Kamala Harris didn't win.
mm,
And it's that lack of, like you said,
mm,
self-criticism,
mm,
that lack of introspection, the ability to look in the mirror and say, did I sell the American public an ideal version of what they want their country to be? And the
mm,
answer has to be no, but they will not
mm.
accept that. They will
Yeah.
not accept that.
Yeah.
You know,
That politicking thing of not, it's safer to not say anything at all than to actually have a policy and say what it
yeah,
is.
absolutely. Which was Harris's approach for 3 months.
Yeah. Yeah.
Harris's approach for 3 months.
Yeah.
Uh,
Are none of them embarrassed that they lied about Joe Biden's health? Are none of them, have they forgotten? I
well,
mean, the
it
news
was
cycle moves fast, doesn't it? But it's like, that's a
absolutely.
big one.
It
That's a
was
big one.
obvious to
Yeah.
anybody that the
Yeah.
man was cognitively deficient.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the man had dementia
Mm,
of some form or another.
mm,
Um, and you know, let's be honest. You know, Joe Biden, his political career does not suggest he's necessarily a very nice person, but he's
mm.
not someone. Or I think the other part of it is that as a human being, you wouldn't want to see an elderly gentleman put through that in
No.
public.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and it was quite unconscionable the fact that
Mm,
they consistently pushed him out to wander around helpless on stage, to fall over, to forget people. And there was one of obvious example I can think of where he gave a small tribute to someone who he thought was in the audience at the time, and she died in a car crash.
mm,
You know,
mm.
there was
God.
some awful
Yeah.
incidents.
Yeah.
Um, and I think one of the things that the Democrats have to reflect on was not only that they put a man who was obviously not well into a position like that,
Mm,
um, it's that they didn't seize the initiative quick enough to replace him.
mm,
They left it far too late, in my view.
mm,
And I think they should have at least put that uh, presidential candidacy out to democracy
mm,
within the party and
mm,
not appoint or
mm.
anoint rather Kamala Harris, because that was a disaster for me.
God, yeah. I mean, the thing is, it's the lack of compassion as well, isn't it? If your politics, if your standing of your party is more important, it's absolutely devoid of humanity. You know, there's something really rotten at the core of it,
Yeah,
you know,
yeah, there really is. Yeah,
and
you're
that's been
absolutely right.
there openly on display for everybody to see. So,
Yeah, yeah, absolutely has. Yes.
yeah.
But let's turn now to closer to home.
Mm-hmm.
So as I said, we're recording this on November the 6th. We are approximately 4 months and 2 days into a new socialist Labour government. Socialist, if you listen to the people on the right, everything that Keir Starmer does is socialist, apparently. I wish it were. Um,
Mm.
but you know, with 4 months in, we've already mentioned about the budget. We've already mentioned about the winter fuel allowance and things like that. But what other than those things, what's your impressions of the first 4 months of Labour?
I I feel that they are. He's not to be trusted anyway. You know, I think he didn't win on a resounding landslide in the sense that the voter turnout was very low. People are kind of more or less given up, and the Tories had been in power for a very long time. And so it was just people were desperate for change here, and it was the same thing in reverse. There was nothing else to vote for. Um, and I mean, just having been a member of the Labour Party, you'll probably be aware of this as well. It's just like they even from the Blair years, one of the first things that they set about doing was dismantling democracy within the party itself. They're extremely anti-democratic.
Yeah.
So that I think that that just carries through. He's made his pledges as the leader of the party, and he just reneged on, all of them. Um, you can't trust him on anything. There's been this expenses scandal at the same time as he's taken the winter fuel allowance, off older people. And they didn't remove the two-child benefit cap. That would have been a nice, straightforward thing for them to do. That's kind of almost like eugenicist, almost like social
Yeah,
engineering
yeah,
in its
it is.
nature, isn't it? Really
Yeah.
nasty stuff. So if they weren't a continuation of the nasty party and they were the socialists that they're supposed to be claimed to be, that would have been one of the obvious first things that they could have put right. I just don't hear that they're doing an awful lot to help people with disabilities or anything like that. And yet there seems to be no end of money to spend on rainbowy stuff that makes them look as if they care about things when there's no substance behind that. It's just a bit of a cop out, isn't it? So I just think 1p off a pint, 1 penny off a pint, it's like almost as if they're laughing, as if they're having a laugh, as if they feel so cocksure and confident in the majority that they've got and the position that they're in and the lack of alternative that anyone had at that point in time. But I think that's going to come back to bite them. As I said, I think reform will be very much decisively on the rise now as a result of that. And I think that they're coming across as very controlling and it's very worrying, actually, quite authoritarian, the way that they've done with the two-tier policing. The lack of information, the clampdown on any, you weren't allowed to discuss, about the Southport situation. They're throwing out terms like Islamophobia and transphobia and homophobia 10 a penny, whilst at the same time they've forgotten what a woman is and why women need to be looked after. Children don't seem to matter either. And although they might be investing in, saying that they're investing more in schools and the NHS and what else have they said that they're going to invest in? Schools, NHS. Well, they've done the farmers wrong. Businesses are going to be
Yeah.
struggling, aren't they, in terms of NI contributions and business
Yeah.
rates, things like that. And just in terms of the infrastructure, it's like, can they possibly be investing enough for it to make any blind bit of difference? Is it only going to be a slight catch up, if even that? Because obviously we've got an aging population, so the NHS, it needs to be funded and then funded more, doesn't it, to take account of that? But a lot of this funding is going into what? It's going into indoctrination and DEI and things like that. Is it actually going into improving the health of people and improving the quality of education that people have? It feels like it's just more meaningless slogans. And the same as we've had here locally. So with SEND, special educational needs and disabilities, there's been some parents who've been campaigning for a number of months, and they've been to the local full council meeting. They've spoken, they've held 2 protests, they've been on the telly, they've got amazing t-shirts, they've got a massive social media presence, and they're really, really good people. And the opposition councillors have all been down to support them on these protests, and so have some of the Labour councillors. And Labour actually tried to co-opt their campaign to get their MP in locally. They tried to make him the face of it, but nothing's changed. And what the council have tried to get away with saying is the same thing that they normally do, is they'll say it's a national issue. They cover everything. Oh, it's the Tories, it's the state we've been left, it's the, however many billion black hole, it's this and it's that. But they're performing they're one of the worst performing councils in the country in terms of turning the assessments of these kids around. And so they're not being honest and truthful, and everybody knows they're not. What's brilliant is that these parents have come along and they've said straight up, here's how we've been treated, this is how we've been gaslit, we've been told that we're responsible for staff in the team officers of the council wanting to leave and having low morale, we've been told we're divisive, we need to adjust our tone. And obviously the biggest one is that we've been told it's a national issue, when clearly Cheshire West and Chester's massively underperforming in national terms. So it's smoke and mirrors, it's gaslighting, it's just the same. It's the same pattern. It's almost like a narcissistic type behavior within the Labour Party. And it feels as if it's just an empty vessel. That's what it feels like. No.
Yeah, absolutely. It's I think with the parlous state that Britain as a nation, not only economically but in all kinds of other ways, in the parlous state it's in, it was always going to be difficult, whoever won the election, to try and turn the ship around, because things are
mm,
pretty bad out there
mm,
right now in terms of
mm,
things like cost of living. You know, a lot of people are very worried about immigration. I think, however, a lot of people have been sold something of a lie by the ruling class, because I always say to people, you have to be careful about what the ruling class say in terms of framing immigration, because they know that we aren't replacing ourselves quick enough, and they need workers to exploit. So if they can't get them from here, they'll get them from somewhere else. But
mm,
they at the same time always talk tough
mm,
on immigration. So it's very, very important that
mm,
people
mm,
are very mindful of that. I've always made the point to people that they say, yes, yes, we're tough on immigration, while they're waving their hands saying, right, go in, don't tell anyone, go on, off you go. But the other thing, of course, on immigration, just to finish the thought, is that whoever's in charge, be it Labour, Tories, or whoever, incredibly cynical,
mm,
incredibly cynical about immigration. Not only in as much as they will lie to your face about trying to be tough on it, while all the while allowing immigrants to come into the country, because we do have a essentially net labour shortage because we're not replacing ourselves quick enough. But it's also the rather cynical way in which immigrants to this country are placed. They're never
mm,
placed in middle class Tory voting areas. They're
mm,
always placed in poor working class areas where
mm.
governments and councils over many, many decades have hollowed out local services.
Yeah.
Um, and with an influx of new people,
Hmm.
all it needs is a little bit of, I said this in a discussion I had with Terry Eaton a little while back. You only need a little nudge from a far right agitator to tell people, well, you see your services running down, it's because of all these new people that have turned up in your area. It isn't true. The services were run down by your government and your councils over many, many years. But if you can get people to connect that rundown of services with that influx of immigrants, that creates the powder keg
Mm,
that explodes as it did in Southport and in other places, isn't it?
mm. Yeah, I mean, I think people feel that they're being patronized, and I think they feel that they're um, not being allowed to express their views and concerns, and that that's being suppressed, and that that is being labeled as misrepresentation and clamped down on by the police at the behest of the government, whilst the government are, they're cheating, and they're receiving it, they're bending the rules basically in terms of
Mm.
expenses and things like that. So I can understand why people feel that there is a two-tier, sort of system in place. And then also, if you look at the ways that working class people who did get involved in some of the demonstrations following those murders in Southport, I mean, some of the things that they said, it turns out that they were correct, to say them. But obviously, there will have been some agitators there that were looking to create nothing but mayhem. But
Mhm.
if there's a conversation to be had about culture and whether it matters, and how women and girls fare within that whole thing, I think it needs to be allowed to be had. And the way that that's being suppressed, and the way some of those people have been punished. I think it was something like 300,000 people were arrested in the UK last year for posts that they've put online. Um, then you look at what happens with paedophiles, for example. And I don't mean paedophiles of a particular sort of religion, or I mean paedophiles per se, or people who beat and abuse women, well, men who do
Mm.
that. The justice system's in an absolute mess. It doesn't feel as if it's on the side of working class people whatsoever. I don't think it does.
No, no. I mean, when you say about a two-tier system, I know, and I understand why people might try and push back against that assertion, but the 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 circle that I can't square is where you have someone like Hugh Edwards, who has, as I understand it, category A uh, child sex photographs on his computer, and he
Mm,
doesn't get sent to prison.
mm,
But a woman who pushes a wheelie bin at police during a riot gets sent down for 2 years.
mm,
And that's the thing that people will say, well, I can't make that make sense.
mm.
And you
Yeah.
can understand why people would say that there is a two-tier system, because there seems to be absolutely no consistency with which the law is applied.
Mm,
Or certainly the application of a law about someone having child sex images on their computer against someone who pushes a wheelie bin at police.
mm.
You know, that
Yeah.
that clearly cannot be,
No,
can it?
No, not at all. No, not
No.
at all. So it just feels as if it, I think for a lot of people, it feels as if the natural justice that used to be part of the unspoken social contract between people and those that are in charge is it's just broken, it doesn't work
Yeah.
anymore.
Yeah.
I mean, on a local level, I know that I've been called repeated names online, as I know I've spoken about before,
Yeah.
by other councillors. I've been threatened by more than one with harm. One person came up and stood over me with a sign over my head at a local pride event. Um, uh, Another person had threatened like physical harm on Facebook Messenger. I've reported child protection concerns or child safeguarding concerns at events where there've been striptease around,
Mm.
children, and
Yeah.
stuff like that. Really inappropriate content, and all of that gets played down, and no one takes any notice of it within the police, and they've closed the cases, and I've only managed to get them reopened by insisting on having meetings with senior officers. And we've had over 6,000 leaflets posted full of lies about us, accusing me of fraud and all sorts of
Mm.
completely unfounded things. Um, and yet I post something on Facebook, and the police phone me up and say that they've had complaints, and they've been out to multiple houses to speak to these people with hurty feelings who don't like how I've phrased something, to ask me to rephrase it. And when I've said, Have I broken the law? No, no, you haven't. Well, I'm a local politician. How can you possibly justify phoning me up? How have you had the time to send people out in cars to
Yeah.
investigate that when you've not responded to far more serious things that I've had, and there's a kind of a there's a strong locally there's a strong bias in support of Labour from my perspective within the police and also within the media. I kind of think that's reflected nationally as well. And I don't think people are daft. I think people notice things like that.
Hmm.
And it's a dangerous slide, isn't it? People need to be able to trust the police to be impartial, need to be able to trust politicians, not politicians, but councils. It's a public sector organisation, it's publicly funded. We have rules in place to try and make sure that although you may have a political ruling group, that the officers and the decisions are done in a democratic way, And when those things start to fall apart, you expect there to be some chinks in them, obviously. Nothing's ever perfect. But to the degree to which it's fallen, I've never seen it. I've never seen that before to this
No,
extent. Mm.
no, I don't remember a time where public public faith in the institutions of civilized society, for want of a better phrase, has been so low. And,
Mm.
and when I say that, I mean our political class, our media class. I think academia's in that, the judiciary, the
Yeah.
police. I don't believe I can remember a time where there was such a mass distrust in all of those organisations. And I think the police has fallen the
Mm.
furthest, the fastest.
Mm.
Um, I mean, it's whatever one's views about the police, and we know they have acted as the strong arm of the establishment in the past. One only has to look at things like the Battle of Orgreave,
Mhm.
and
Yeah.
other incidents as well, where the working class and the police have come into conflict.
Mm.
Whatever you might think, I think you're right. It's the least working class people can expect from the police is to enforce the law, and where
Well,
people break the law, to just enforce it.
yeah, you're right. It's the thing in the 80s, I don't know if you remember the same, but in the 80s, people did have a fear of the police because it was known that behind closed doors, they would think nothing of giving someone a good kicking. They'd just make sure they did it where it wasn't going to be as
Yeah,
obviously bruising or whatever. So it was behind closed doors brutality, or once the Black Maria doors closed, there'd be police brutality in the main. Obviously, with the
yeah.
minors, that was an Orgreave, that was different.
Mhm.
There was a fear of the police. It was known that the police kind of had overreached, and broken that contract a little bit. But it was more. But now it's kind of shameless in a way. It's shameless, So in the 80s, it was kind of when they thought they could get away with it behind closed doors, or if it was in the open, it was because they'd overreached and gone too far and messed up. And oh no, that's visible now. We're going to have to be accountable 20 years down the line if anyone ever, manages to get any justice on it. But now it's kind of shameless. They've got license to do it. And they've got
Mm.
license to be completely openly ideologically biased. And that I think that is unprecedented. I think that's quite worrying. Yeah. Mm.
Yeah, it is worrying. I mean, um, Paul Embry, who is a noted trade unionist and writer, and someone I've been following for some time. I think he said it on more than one occasion. One of the problems I think the modern police have got these days is they're not really the police anymore. They're social workers wearing uniform.
Right.
They, as you said with your incident, you know, someone makes a complaint about something you put on Facebook. They do a runaround to try and find anyone who's been upset, and then come round your house and tell you to change your language, even though you've broken no law.
Yeah.
No law. In fact, that's absolutely nothing to do with the police.
No,
What
shouldn't be.
enforcing what people put on Facebook is nothing to do with the police,
No.
unless of course it's inciting violence,
Yeah.
or it's racist or
Mm.
homophobic or sexist or something like that. Then
Mhm.
maybe then
Yeah.
the police.
Yeah.
I mean, personally, I think that Facebook should police it themselves. But you know, if we're, I mean, we don't want to go down the rabbit hole talking about what hate speech constitutes, because
Yeah.
basically, hate speech is normally when the person who hears it hates it. It's not
Hmm.
to do with what the motivation of the person putting it up. But no,
Mm.
the police are more like social workers now these days
Yeah. Yeah.
than
Yeah.
enforcers of the law. Um,
Yeah. I mean,
and
I
that's
did
a big
ask
problem.
them. I did ask them, have I broken the law? I don't think I've broken the law, have I? And they said, oh, no, 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 you haven't broken the law. I said, are you recording it as a non-crime hate incident? Well, we're not at liberty to say that. I was like, well, if I've not broken the law, as far as I'm concerned, I don't have to change a single thing.
No.
I have freedom of speech. I actually have an enhanced level of freedom of speech as a locally elected politician. So, and he said, oh, no, 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 you don't have to. You don't have to. It's like, well, what are you phoning me up for?
Well, why you? Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
what a crass waste of police time. You
Mm,
know, when you think about processing the complaint, visiting people to say, "Are you okay? Would you like this reworded?" and then someone having to be paid to ring you
mm,
to ask you to tone it down a bit,
mm.
all for something that wasn't even illegal in the first place.
Yeah, and visiting several people's houses, whilst at the same time, they've got a policy now where they're not even if there's a rape, they're not even recording that necessarily as having been that they are allowing that person to identify their own sex on how that's recorded on the police database. This was discussed, wasn't it? I think within the last week in the House of Lords about how data, not just in the census nationally, but in
Yes.
health and
Yeah.
also in policing and in the courts and in the prison service. If we don't have accurate research data, we can't shape our services or our society to make sure that everyone has an equal chance of being safe. We just
Yes.
can't do it. We're lying to ourselves.
Yeah.
So it's really serious. They're failing massively on really, really obvious things like that. And yet they're running around after silly little people that have got hurty feelings about the way someone phrased a thing on
Yeah.
Facebook. It's too much of a departure from where the social contract is supposed to be at, I think.
Yeah, I agree, and I think
Yeah.
no. Speaking from a ruling class's point of view, if you want to maintain your control over a state, then you need your subjects, for want of a better word, to have faith in all of those
Yeah.
pillars. If they don't, the whole edifice collapses.
Yeah.
The whole
They've
thing
forgotten.
falls down. And I think, you know, for people like myself who, you know, revolutionary working class sort of person, maybe that's what we want. Maybe we want
Yeah.
faith to be lost in. But
Mm.
whatever happens in the future, that faith will have to be restored. It'll
Mm.
either have to be done by the ruling class or us.
Mm. Mm.
Sooner or later, we're going to have to restore people's faith in these things.
Like on that topic, do you ever wonder if they are goading and pushing and gaslighting because they want things to kick off? Is there some agenda potentially in things kicking off?
Well, I mean, I certainly think that there's a motive for the ruling class to agitate sections of the working class against each other.
Just
I think that's
sections.
why
Yeah. Yeah.
that's why we have things like identity politics,
Mm.
because those are things that carve up people who are essentially the same down lines of race, sex, religion, sexual orientation, and so on.
Mm.
So yeah,
Mm.
anything the ruling class can do to throw a hand grenade amongst the working class, they'll take that chance.
Mm.
And it's conceivable that um, the erosion of faith in our pillars of civilized society is part of that. Absolutely,
Mm.
100%. I mean,
Mm.
Theresa May, I believe, made 20,000 police officers redundant. Well, you don't
Mm.
do that if you want to keep people's faith in the police.
Mm.
And I think I can't remember if I've said it in an interview we've done before. but I've lost count of how many times I've said this. One of the worst things you can do, it doesn't matter whether it's the police or whether it's your own workplace or anywhere else. Often the worst thing you can do is make the workers in any office or any field of life, make them believe that they're understaffed and they cannot do something. Because
Mm,
once you do that, that rot sets in and it goes in very deep. So what
mm,
you do, you demoralize an entire workforce in one fell swoop by getting rid of a whole load of staff. And
yeah.
I've seen it in, I've got a friend who works in the HMRC.
Mm,
It's happened there. He has, through his HMRC work, contacts within the police, and it's the
mm,
same there. If
mm,
you make a group of workers believe that they're understaffed and they're limited in what they can do, morale crashes through the floor, and the ability of that organization, whatever it is, to do what they're there to do, is completely destroyed.
mm,
And I
mm.
think that's
It's interesting. I think the morale, yeah, maybe I feel like a lot of what's happening is to try and squeeze people so much that there isn't the morale to fight back, if you know what I mean.
Mm,
And then what you were saying about dividing people into smaller and smaller groups, I agree, and I understand that. I just think there's almost like two super groups then. That leaves two super groups. So there's all these individual groups over here. So your gender critical people, your people who are concerned about cultural aspects of immigration within their community and what's happened at Southport. They're sort of extrapolating it onto that. And then you've got Tommy Robinson and people winding that up or whatever. But those are people who I think I mean, from what I've seen of them, obviously some are football hooligans. They've always liked fighting, but some of them are
mhm.
people who just really care about their communities and they're genuinely worried, you know. And then some of them are just economically frustrated and downtrodden and angry, you know, just for that
Yes,
reason as much as anything.
yes,
But you've got people who've got fire that in them still to fight. But then on the
yeah,
other side of the equations, if you could divide that, that's different groups, but they're on that side because what they've got in common is they've got some fire left to still fight. And then on this side, you've got compliant people that never question anything, and they're never going to be rioting about anything. You'd have to push them really, really hard.
yeah.
So maybe the idea is if it was about half of the population or a quarter that went absolutely nuts, you'd be able to sort of contain that in such a way that it'd put anyone off ever rebelling against anything again.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean,
Yeah.
what you're saying about that first group, the ones that had a little bit of fire in their belly, I think they had and have legitimate concerns,
Mm,
and those concerns should be listened to. The reason why they won't be is because of how their concerns manifested themselves. Because
mm,
it burst out into violence
yeah.
all of a sudden, no matter whether, I mean, look, let's be clear about this. There were
Mm.
probably very likely right wing agitators within there stirring
Oh,
up the shit
definitely.
and causing it
Yes.
all to kick off. Okay,
Yeah.
that's absolutely certain that happened,
Hmm.
but not all of them were that. Not all of
Mm,
them were those sort of people. There was
absolutely.
large numbers of those people who were writing, who, like you said, had a
Mm,
sense of attachment to where they were, had
mm,
seen it go down the toilet, and had had enough, and it
mm,
burst open in these acts of violence.
yeah.
What the problem for those people though is that there are people who um purport to try to change the world in one way or another, calling these people racists, calling them bigots, disassociating themselves completely from them, rather than hear their
Mm,
legitimate concerns,
mm.
call them a racist, and then put them in a box and forget all about them.
Yeah, and tar everybody with exactly the same brush.
Yeah,
There's no
exactly.
nuance, no room for any
No,
nuance,
none
is
at
there?
all. None at
As
all.
I said to you, my mum, she wanted to go to see Katie Hopkins for her birthday.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, I don't think I can. It's not for me, mum. And then I felt really bad. I thought, I'm such a snob. The woman's actually quite funny. You know what I mean? She is, and she laughs at herself and everything. And there's going to be some stuff that I find distasteful.
Yeah.
But in a sense, all of us need to be able to learn to laugh at ourselves a little bit. So one of the people that she's not punching down on, but she's kind of making fun of is butch lesbians. But there was a gaggle of bunch lesbians there that were having an absolutely amazing time. And she stood up, she goes, "Where's my sturdy lesbians?" And they stood up with their pints like, "Hooray!" There's something British and English and nice about being able to just laugh about stuff and not. We do offensive humor actually as a very English thing.
Yes.
Farming is a very English thing. I mean, as someone on the left, I've always understood that farmers do a lot of whinging and they're usually overprivileged. So I've never supported their cause ever, but thinking about people not being able to pass on their farm to their kids and it all just being taken over by a faceless corporate entity,
Mm,
that's quite scary. And I think it would be something
yeah.
that it makes me realize there's certain things about Englishness. I mean, I've always hated flag waving, a land of hope and glory. I'll always duck out of that. I'll go and get a beer or something.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
it's made me the way that things are disintegrating, and it seems as if they're being purposely disintegrated. It's making me realize I have got some attachments to Englishness and Britishness and the culture that we have and the traditions that we have here as
Yeah.
well.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I
Weird.
mean,
Yeah,
uh,
don't know.
well, I mean, uh, I don't subscribe to the view that because you're a leftist or of the left, that you have to instantly detest your country and everyone that's in it, label them all as racist, homophobic, bigots, and any chance you get, do the place down. And let's be clear, there are people on Twitter who are exactly like that. They
Yeah,
revile this country and they
yeah,
revile everything about it. Now, this country. Let's be clear. This country has an ugly history. It's had an ugly past.
yeah.
But in my experience, most of the working class people I come across have had absolutely nothing to do with anything about that ugly past.
Yeah,
Most
yeah.
of the ugly past that Britain has been created by our ruling class.
Mm,
Um, it's been the working class that have been sent to wars started by the ruling class and died. You know,
mm,
it's it's the working class who have been at the end of a truncheon, going back to
yes.
the Battle of Orgreave because the ruling class basically wanted to put the working class back in their box. Um, so when a working class person says that they're patriotic, I do believe them. All right,
Mm,
I might not necessarily agree with all the things that they attach to that patriotism, but
mm,
I think I look at a country like the Soviet Union,
mm.
one of the most patriotic nations the world's ever seen, because it
Yeah.
was a state created by the workers from nothing.
So there's
So
national pride as opposed to sort of
national pride in what
nationalism.
what,
Yeah,
what the workers had created for themselves,
yeah,
and that's the sort of thing we should be looking to try to build
yeah.
here.
That's
Um,
interesting. So that's healthy, isn't it? National pride is healthy, whereas nationalism is not so
well,
healthy. And
the critical thing is about in terms of patriotism is your ownership of what is around you, and the
yeah,
reason why we've got so much um or so much what's the word so much demoralization is
yeah,
because people have so little ownership of the world around them in this
mm,
country. So
mm,
little ownership. you know
yeah.
there are things that go on in their towns and their cities that they had no input into, were never asked for. There's a load of other things that need to be done, they won't get done,
Mm,
and they know that won't get done. And it's that
yeah,
disconnect that exists now between people and the
yeah,
places where they live that's causing
yeah,
a lot of this resentment, isn't it?
yeah. So you can understand why people are desperate for something to buy into, and they feel that's being
Yeah,
eroded,
yeah,
yeah, so like a sense of shifting sands and
yeah,
disconnect.
exactly,
It's not good for
exactly.
people. Yeah.
No, no, it isn't. No, I mean
Mm,
this disenfranchisement is not, it's not good. You have to somehow create a level of buy-in for people
mm,
and to give them a connection back, with what's going on around them.
yeah.
I mean, you speak as a councillor, but what's the usual council or turnout for council elections these days? It's
Oh,
it's vanishingly
between
small these days.
17%, 24%-ish
Yeah,
on average.
exactly,
Yeah, very low.
exactly.
Yeah, yeah.
Very low, very low,
Mm,
and that disconnect is not an accident. In fact, I mean, I'm making a bit of a generalised statement here, and I would have to look into it. But I would imagine that more people get engaged by independent
yeah.
councillors standing for
Well,
office than they do by a
I
party
hope
political one.
I hope so. I mean, I don't just do sort of big ticket policy pushback. I'm doing the bread and butter stuff, helping people with housing issues and helping people. There's like a suspected dangerous dog down the street, or someone's gone up against social services and they've not been treated fairly and they need an
Yeah,
advocate and stuff like that. I'm really happy that people get in touch with me to be able to do the day-to-day things like that. But I think, I mean, definitely, I've started something up called Council Watch, it's not my idea. There's other council watches in a couple of other local authority areas as well, but it's a fledgling thing that I've just landed on YouTube. And I'm starting a new project called Women's Work as well with a friend of mine called Sally. And we're going to land our council watch on that website and our other various women related projects on women's work. The idea of women's work as well, part of it is to try and encourage and support independence to stand. Not just women either, like women and men. But along the lines of sort of basic democratic principles, being evidence-based in your policy making and that kind of thing, and your willingness to speak up for the communities that have been most neglected. Those kinds of basic principles that you could have any political outlook or none, but if you're fastened to those kind of basic principles and that you're open to having your views challenged and you're willing to debate respectfully and not engage in name calling and reducing things down to insults and things like that. I just think we've lost our way so badly. It would be really nice to have a group of independents that are linked by a shared manifesto along just really simple principles like that. And I don't know if we can do it or not, if we can grow it, but I'm interested in giving that a go. So I'm probably going to try and get something started and land that on this website. I've just started to build it, so that's quite exciting at the minute.
Yes. I mean,
Yeah.
I can't help but think that the more councils that have more independent councillors on them can only be a progressive step. I think, whatever people's views about bourgeois democracy, we have to try, at least at the local level, to sweep away party politics out of councils, because
Definitely.
I think the fundamentals of what people want from their local services are pretty uniform. I don't really anticipate a lot of splits along like party political lines. For instance, I think everyone wants their street lights to work. They want roads that are free of potholes. They want their bins collected. They don't want dog mess on the streets. They want litter picked up. They want their parks to be looked after. We all have those things in common. And to be honest with you, I don't really see a distinction between a Labour council and a Tory council with regards to delivering any of those things.
No, there isn't on those things, definitely not. And I think in the past, political persuasion, you'd maybe do more for social services and older people, and that if you were of the Labour persuasion, you'd be doing more for the rural communities that are already affluent if you were Tory led, whatever. So, but things have changed so much. I don't really think you can draw those distinctions so easily now. But there is the ideology that's crept in though. So I get more support on the policies because we do, obviously it's not just clean streets and highways issues and speeding cars and community centres and things like that. It is also how we're delivering our services to our looked after children, the guidance that we produce for all of the local schools on different things like inclusion and things like that, the commissioning of refuges for women and stuff, provision of leisure services, so whether we've got unisex changing rooms that put women at risk and make them feel uncomfortable. So there are all of those areas and more are where the ideology is crept in. Well, it's crept in and it's really taken hold strong and fast. And any challenge on it has been slammed shut by Labour. And at first I didn't have any support from the other independents, from the Greens, from the Lib Dem, or from any of the Tories. So Labour would just close it shut and no one would vote in favour of debating these things. And no one would speak up in support if I got as far as, as far as a debate. And now that's massively changed. It's massively changed. We've got so many people now, especially because of the CAS review and things like that. But it's also been a drip of persistence. Now, Labour will frame that as me being repetitive and bringing the same things over and over again. And maybe they try and present me as a one-trick pony, but I bring all sorts of issues. But it's just the way that they like to spin it to close that down as hard as they can. They'll make it personal if they can. But the Tories they're very supportive now, and they can see past that, and they feel courageous enough to be able to speak out, and they know they've got an evidence base that they can kind of fix that too as well now with the CAS review. But I have been in trouble with someone on the left recently, who I've got a history of going along to picket lines and stuff with, and I stay in touch with now and again. And they said, all these named votes that you're asking for, it's really tedious for anyone who's watching these meetings on the webcast. And it is, because it takes like as long as it takes to go through 70 councillors. You know, we've all got to press the mic button and say the name and how they're voting. But, and you can't win in a way, because it's like the meetings are tedious. They haven't got good audio visual. We sound like we're in a fish tank. To anyone who does bother to sit and watch, they pad it out with loads of tedium so that they can just fill it with their own voices as much as possible, so that there's as little time to be challenged on anything as possible. And then if you don't get a named vote, you don't have the receipts. And I'm trying to gather evidence so that I can try and get the council inspected. I want an external inspection of how the council's running, because I think there are a lot of problems, not just the ideology, but much broader than that, with a lot of different issues. And there's other councillors who have concerns, and there's residents who've also got concerns about how they've been let down, and the treatment they've received has been anti-democratic, proactively anti-democratic. So I'm trying to build that case, and I can't do it without getting the named vote. But the name vote goes on and on and on. So it's like, it's hard sometimes to know what to do for the best, you know? So.
Yeah, quite. You mentioned the cash report. It's not on my list of points, but it's an interesting one. What was your reaction to the final publication of the cash report?
Well, I think she's in the Lords now, isn't she?
I believe
I
so.
wonder
Yeah.
if she would have been in the Lords if she'd done what we all thought, we all really needed her to do. Because it's been helpful what she's done, don't get me wrong. It really has been helpful in stemming a lot of this harm, because it's said clearly, look, there's no evidence. And on the basis of that, proceed with great caution. It shouldn't have been, you don't experiment on children, full stop. If there's no evidence, just don't do it. Just don't do it. Don't experiment on children, especially when we know that, you know, 80% of them are going to change their mind about whether they're gender confused once they've been through puberty. So if you block them from going through puberty, they're never going to get there. And there's no evidence that adults that have been so-called transitioned are any better off in terms of their mental health. And we just haven't had the follow-up to know if they're managing okay in terms of their physical health. But what we do know is that there's a growing body of evidence that these procedures, they've been experimental, and for very many people they're disastrous, you know, in terms of their mental and their physical health. So on that basis, to me, you just draw a big red line and say this should never have happened. There's no evidence of any innate transness in any child. There's a category here that's been imposed by activist groups called trans. And within that, it includes men who've got fetishes and middle-aged, which is a massive cohort of this trans umbrella. And then at the other end of the spectrum, you've got boys who've been watching too much porn online and they've been suckered in, you know, down a rabbit hole with that and lost themselves. And there's girls who absolutely hate themselves because either they're lesbians or they don't fit with the aesthetic of the modern female, the modern woman, young woman supposed to fit in with. And we've done no investigation as to whether this is the same social contagion as we've seen with anorexia, self-harm, tics, all of these other trends that kids go through. It's almost a normal rite of passage for kids to get sucked into some trend or other and think it's cool. So because we don't have any evidence, to me, first do no harm. And it was an open door for her to be able to say that. And for some reason, she didn't quite say it. She said, proceed only with caution. We're going to have a trial. We don't know any detail about who's going to be eligible for the trial and whether she just meant children who aren't gender questioning, but they've got like some kind of endocrine problem, which is okay. You know, that's a different thing. Or whether there are going to be some children that they're going to try and read the future and decide, oh yeah, we're sure that one's not going to change their mind or turn out to be gay. So yeah, carry on with the experiment on that one. It's just, and the amount of promotion of this within schools didn't really get much of a mention by Cass either. And the social aspect of that, the social experimentation and influence on health outcomes, it is relevant, and I think it should have been included in her research over the course of 4 years. She had ample opportunity. So she's adopted the language of the cult from my point of view, and she's not quite been brave enough to put the lid on it and say, look, no, it's not a good idea. There's nothing good that can come from doing this on the basis of no evidence.
Yeah, absolutely. I think as well, again, we come back to what we were saying earlier on. It will be interesting to see what happens once Donald Trump's backside is in the president's chair in
Yeah.
next year, and what will happen to the gender identity ideologues after that.
Hmm.
It will be interesting to see. I mean, the fact that the NHS could administer treatment to people, particularly children, on the basis of very, very little evidence. And then shortly after, I think it was after I think it was after the publication of the Cass report, when the NHS said they were going to withdraw um, that sort of medical intervention for children because there wasn't a lack of evidence. Begged the question, well, why were they being given it in the first place if there was no evidence?
Yeah.
You either had the evidence before you gave them the treatments, or you didn't have the evidence and gave it anyway.
Yeah.
And the NHS, for whatever reason, would not basically freely admit we were giving people treatments for which we had no evidence.
Yeah.
Um, but there was certainly you know, I mean, there was the initial reports. There was a preliminary report, wasn't there, a little while back, which
Yes,
essentially brought about the closure of the Tavistock
that's right.
hospital in London, and I believe there was another one up in Leeds.
Mm.
Um, and there was some very concerning stories coming out of both hospitals with regard to perhaps the level of qualification of some of the practitioners that were working there, and that some of the people that were working there were more ideologues than they were medical practitioners, essentially, or certainly
Yes.
that was where their
Yeah.
focus was, more on their ideology than
Hmm.
actually helping people.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, we'll have to see. I mean, yes, I read the Cass review. I did think she pulled her punches quite a lot. I mean, that was
Hmm.
that was my impression. I
Yeah.
think I think and I can't help but think she was conscious of not being called a transphobe
Yeah.
when she was writing her report.
Yeah.
She was trying to be as even-handed as she was, but
Mm.
I think she ended up being quite muted in some of her
Yeah.
language. But we'll see.
Mm.
We'll see how things pan out in the coming months. Like I said, I think Trump becoming president will have a big influence on where gender identity ideology goes in the
I
future.
think I have a lot of hope. I have more hope than I've had for such a long time, and it's just the weirdest thing to feel that, because I remember. So I see how I've got younger kids, and so one of my daughters is 22, and then I've got an 18-year-old, got a 14-year-old, and a 22-year-old. She feels like the world's almost come to an end. You know that Trump's in power. She feels like I did, however many years ago when he got in the first time. I felt the world had come to an end. I was really scared because there was a lot of hype about what he was and wasn't going to do. Actually, there was more hype than action, wasn't there, in the end?
Yes.
And I just think this time around, I just, it's very strange to go from feeling like this is the worst thing that could possibly happen on every level, to feeling absolute relief, like this is a pivotal moment and we were about to go over the edge into oblivion in terms of free speech, in terms of women's rights, in terms of same-sex attraction rights and definitions, and in terms of children's safety as well. Really scary times. So fingers crossed. Yeah, fingers crossed
Yeah,
it'll
absolutely. Well,
help us.
certainly I can speak for myself as I've begun to develop a bit more of a Marxist understanding of the world. One of the things I would say to people who want to make the step into Marxism is that one of the things that happens as you develop your understanding is that less and less things you see in the news surprise you, and
Yeah.
less things you see in the news upset you.
Mm,
Because if you apply a Marxist approach to it all makes much more sense when you see, because you tend to zoom out of whatever it is you're seeing on the television, and you start to
mm,
connect it with other things.
mm.
And so
Mhm.
the election of Donald Trump doesn't shock me. I was
No.
surprised, but it doesn't shock me. And you
Mm.
start to look at why he's been put there and what he's
Yeah.
there to do.
I think, that his behavior in some ways has been the behavior of probably most most men who've always been privileged in very privileged sort of full-on masculine business circles. There's probably a certain culture that goes with that of entitlement around women and things like that. He's probably not that much different from anyone else who has ever been in a similar position, who's male in terms of his behavior. But there's a humanizing thing that's happened where he's had these conversations with Elon Musk, and then Elon Musk has also talked about his own child and what's happened with his own child and how he was conned into agreeing to that child's. They weren't given he didn't give informed consent, and he's angry and feels betrayed about that, as any father would. I've heard a real humanizing side of Elon Musk, and then a slightly more human perception of the fallible human being that Trump is. I don't think I even saw him as a human being the first time
No,
around.
no.
I
Well, I
just thought,
what you said just then about Donald Trump and his privilege. Let's be clear. We live in a time where all kinds of people are being exposed for what they do. Privileged people being exposed for what they do when they believe that because of their wealth and their power and their privilege, there are almost no consequences. You know, we look at Harvey Weinstein. You look
yeah,
at Jeffrey Epstein. You look at Sean Combs. You know,
yes,
these are people who've amassed great power and wealth and who believe they're untouchable. And that,
mm,
I mean, I don't want to go down too much of a philosophical route, but
mm,
that is what corrupts people when they've got all those absolute powers, absolute power, wealth, and so on.
mm,
And that's how it manifests itself. Um,
mm.
I just wanted to quickly go back to something you mentioned a little while ago about the prevalence of pornography and
Mm.
the pernicious effect that it is having on people of all ages. It has to be said.
Mm.
Um, what's your view on controlling access to pornography, or whether or not we should have pornography at all?
Well, I think pornography for young boys is disastrous. That their ability to access it freely, free of charge, and so readily online, is absolutely disastrous in terms of their sexual function and their expectations, their self-esteem, and their vulnerability to being sucked into an ever more extreme path. And one of those paths, obviously, is the gender, identity ideology pathway. So GenSpect, that organization called GenSpect, which Stella O'Malley and Sasha Ayad, I think might be a committee of them that head up GenSpect, but Stella O'Malley and Sasha Ayad do a podcast called Gender: A Wider Lens on YouTube. And they did an interview with a young man, and it was very insightful, and it was absolutely heartbreaking to listen to. I mean, I've got two sons, as I said, I've got 18-year-old and a 14-year-old. And you would expect boys to get their hands on porn and dabble a little bit at that age. That would be a normal expectation, and that's sort of generations and generations of men have been there as the normal part of their growing up and learning about themselves and what have you. But this is sinister, what's happening to these young lads. This lad, it's subliminal. They do target young men in a very different way than they target young women online, and they'll offer them certain suggestions in just flashes of suggestions that plant ideas in their head and attract them down a certain route. So this young man ended up feeling like first of all, that he was gay, and then that he wanted to dress as a woman, and then that maybe he needed to have surgery and he needed to have hormones and things like that. And I think he'd been on the hormones for about a week when he met a girl and they started hanging out, and she was really relaxed about what he was doing. He was dressing mainly as a woman at the time. And they fell in love and they got on really, really well. And she said, well, it's fine, whatever, do whatever you do. And then one day they went for a picnic, and he just happened not to have had time to get himself all dressed up, and he went just as himself. And she just happened to say to him, you're really nice as yourself. I really like it. I'm fine with you doing, what you do, but it's nice, like that. And something in him then twigged and allowed him to feel comfortable being himself again, bearing in mind he'd been estranged from his parents as a result of this. They were heartbroken. He'd been unwell. He'd been mentally unwell as a result of this. He'd completely lost himself. And through this relationship he had with this relaxed girl that wasn't judging him and wasn't giving him a hard time, he found his way back onto a hetero path. Not that there's anything wrong with being gay. I'm not saying that there is, but that wasn't his natural path. It was a path he'd been deliberately pulled onto by subliminal messaging through porn. And I just don't know how many young lads are being affected in this way. But I know
Mm.
certainly like self-esteem, sexual function, it's addictive in the same way that gaming is addictive. And you know, within schools, they notice that the more that young boys are gaming and they are online, the less likely they are to be able to succeed in their studies or focus on what they're doing and get the best out of their life, you know. So it's really worrying and it's really unhealthy and it's not fair. It's not their fault, you know. I feel very, very sorry for them because they have a high propensity to be pulled into that because of their biology at that age. They're defenseless against it. It's awful. I think it's really bad.
Yeah, yeah,
Uh,
you're right. And I personally, I worry about I suppose the images that pornography gives young men about how you have a relationship with a woman, you know.
yeah.
Um, you know, and also obviously the looking at the other way, you can
Mm.
understand why a young woman was to see something like that on a porn website and then never want to go near a relationship with anyone again
Yeah.
because
Or
they
feel
know
that that's what she,
if that's what's
yeah.
going to happen,
Yeah.
I want nothing to do with it, you know.
Yeah. I think there's some evidence, isn't there, that young people are having less sex and they're having fewer relationships, becoming more isolated.
Yeah,
And you can't help but wonder if there's a causality, you know, linked with that.
I definitely
Yeah.
think that. Yeah, I
Yeah.
definitely think there is.
That's so sad. It's one of the most exciting, lovely things of being young, isn't it? You know, so such a shame. Whether
Yeah,
it's a kid who's like found out that they're gay or if they're straight or whatever, venturing into those relationships and finding out who you are and that interplay between people, you know, for the first time. It's a special thing. It's an important rite of passage. And what the hell, you know, if we
yeah,
lose that, I don't know. But
that's
yeah,
right.
girls might feel that they aren't going to be attractive or able to compete with other girls if they're not doing certain things or that they're vanilla. There's that thing about being too
Mm,
vanilla, isn't there, as well? It's like,
yeah.
it's really coercive. Some of the language around it, some of the expectations, it's not good. It's not healthy.
Mm,
I don't know what the
yeah,
answer is. I think restricting free access online, don't know how you would do it, but something needs to change, I think. I think we're
yeah.
heading for some kind of a disaster with that if we don't
Yeah,
sort
I
it out.
think we are heading for a reckoning, and um, it seems unconscionable, really, that Western governments, knowing that this is coming, they're knowing that this reckoning is on its way, and have yet done absolutely nothing. They
Mm,
even, simple things like putting websites behind paywalls, for instance,
yeah.
um, haven't even done that,
No.
and seem to be absolutely fine with completely unfettered access to
Mm,
pornography,
yeah.
for people of all ages, which is quite
Yeah.
concerning, quite concerning. I
The
wanted
other
to
thing as well, just to
sorry,
add
go on.
quickly on that, is
Yeah.
about what's happening in schools, because there's a thing that's coming at the same time as the gender identity thing, which is to do with consent. When I heard my kids saying, "Oh, we're learning about consent this week," I just thought it was going to be about respect for women and girls and stuff like that. But it's not. It's more about here's the massive range of things that are now normal.
Right.
Make sure that you get consent, but it's normal, you know, and what might you want to do? And then they give them all these options and they role play things with, like, they have like a dice game where they have all the different acts that and objects that can be used and stuff like that. It's not stuff that we used to talk about in school. I don't think it's necessary or appropriate for them to be getting children to explore those things in school. They're going to find those things out, you know,
Mm,
that, that there's
yeah.
a wide variety of options. But to present that whole realm of porn as if it's normal and it's just a question of making sure you've got consent, it's dehumanizing, you know. I just think it's
Yeah,
dehumanizing. Yeah.
it is. It is. I mean, well, I suppose my connection is I make the connection between that sort of thing being put out in front of children in schools. When you look at the teaching unions, including the NEU, who believe the National Education Union, who believe that their members should not be necessarily teachers, but they should be activists. And
Yeah.
then you tie that into the wider left that seems
Mm.
to think that anything that controls access to pornography or drugs or anything else that's got potentially debilitating effects is actually bad.
Yes.
You
Yeah. Yeah.
look at the modern left's attitude to well, you had a sort of left government in the Blair government of 97 to 2010,
Mm.
where they liberalized access to alcohol, they liberated opening times. there was no net benefit for that. There was no
No.
net benefit. All you had was more trouble that was related to drink, more
Mm.
people drinking earlier, more people drinking for longer, and all the problems that come with it. And
Yeah.
you know,
Mm.
the idea that you're somehow progressive when you just say, "Oh, anything goes," you
Yes,
crack on
to
as long as you got permission, do
yes.
whatever
Yeah.
you like.
Yes. Yeah.
And I think that speaks to a real pervasive attitude amongst the modern left about, it's basically okay to have an anything goes attitude so long as you don't do anything that the person that you're doing it with says no to, and that's it.
Absolutely. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, it's a
Yeah,
big change. It's a big change. And I don't think a lot of parents realize that's how much it's shifted in schools. It's really very much been under the radar, and that's worrying. That's really
yeah,
worrying.
yeah, that's right. And
Mm.
and, and just to close the point before we move on to the next topic, how much as a parent, how much do parents know about these sort of things being taught to their children?
I really
How
just
at
don't
all
think
are
they
they?
do, because my children have been through high school in the heyday of this, and they came home joking with each other. Did you just assume my gender? I heard them saying that to each other and having a laugh about it and stuff. But it's sunk in with them because they think
Yeah,
I'm a raving bigot now.
yeah,
You really do. So, like, they've taken those things on board. I've got one daughter that's unfriended me on Facebook because she doesn't want to be associated with me. I'm a I'm
guilty
a
by
working
implication. Yeah,
yeah, but I'm not. I mean, I've been probably a little bit too, because we went through this fad of, I don't know, it's a fad, but attachment parenting. You put a baby in a sling and carry it around everywhere and never put it down and never let it cry. It's like, I did a bit of that. I got carried along with a bit of that. But essentially, I'm a little bit too working class to let my kids intimidate me into thinking that they're right and I'm wrong. But there's too many parents that are intimidated by their kids.
of
So,
course. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I must preface what I say by saying that I'm not a parent myself, but I get the impression there's a lot of parents who lose a battle of wills with their own children quite frequently.
yeah.
Yeah, probably more frequently than
Definitely.
they should.
But I didn't know that agenda was being pushed within their school to the extent it was. I had no idea. It's only since becoming a counsellor and then becoming more alert to it and involved in it.
No, it's that disconnect again, isn't there, between a parent and what their children are being taught at school. Now, I'm not necessarily suggesting that teachers write the curriculum for their own children, of course, but at least the least they could do is inform parents as to what they're being taught in schools,
And
and they
also
can
make
then
sure
make
that
a
it
decision, can't they, on whether or not that child participates or not.
definitely, but my minimum expectation was that they were teaching the children facts and that they were keeping politics and ideological preferences out of it. They were
Mm,
my minimal
yeah.
expectations, and that's not what's been happening. And I really just don't think parents are aware of that at all. There's a massive job of
No.
work still to be done to raise awareness amongst parents, and it's quite hard because as parents, you're not really consumers, are you, in terms of the schools? You're
Yeah.
not really encouraged to get together other than the PTA, which is more like people who've got the time to do fundraising and things like that. But
Yeah.
it's not there to scrutinize. Parents aren't scrutinizing schools and they're not in touch with each other unless someone holds a public meeting and flyers all of the parents outside the school and says, come along, we've got this thing to talk about, which I might still do. But then you'd have
Hmm.
to find a venue that would have you. If you're talking about DEI policies, you're going to get trans activists phoning that venue and saying,
Yep.
don't let that parent
Yep.
hold that meeting there, whatever you do. They're
Yep.
transphobic, so it's kind
Yep.
of parents don't have these links between each other to be able to scrutinize and discuss what's going on within the school. And I didn't get that from my kids. They didn't tell me. Kids don't. They're fed up of being in school. They've come home. Did you have a nice day? Yeah, it was all right. They don't want to talk about that.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
So you
Yeah.
don't get to find out, and that's really quite worrying. We need to find a way of breaking through that. I'm not quite sure how, but
Mm.
yeah.
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right. I mean, it's the least. I mean, from a simple pounds and pence point of view, as a taxpayer who's paying essentially through their taxation for their children to be educated, the least that they could
Hmm.
do is give you a clear picture of everything
Yeah.
they're going to be taught. And I do think, and it's certainly true in America, and I think it's true to a degree over here, where you've got this activist layer that ends up working as teachers in schools.
Mm.
They have no interest in you finding out what their children
Mm.
or your children are being told. They don't want you to know, because if you were to know, you might object to it, and they don't want that.
Yeah. And it only takes one. It only takes one to make it. Say one person who's got a trans child. No one wants to be mean. You know what I mean? So then that's everybody captured.
absolutely. Yeah.
It's like an emotional blackmail, isn't it? It just kind of
Mm.
poisons the well for everybody,
Yeah,
really.
yeah,
Can't talk about it
absolutely.
anymore. There's no debate, you know,
Mm.
and the pressure is on really to make sure that everyone falls in line. But yeah, it's very worrying. And the Ofsted aren't regulating that. They're not doing their job because they're
Mm.
captured. You know,
Yeah.
same way as with the courts, same way as with the government. It's like every level, everywhere you
Again,
turn.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and you know, with all of those organisations, be it Ofsted, be it the judiciary, the media, Stonewall is the name that keeps coming up over and over and over again, isn't it? It's the link between all of them.
It
Uh,
is. It is, but they've got clever. They've got clever. So now there was that report done by, oh, I'm trying to remember his name. It was an Irish reporter, BBC reporter who did a podcast series. It was
what
about
is it?
10
Stephen
parter.
Nolan.
Stephen Nolan,
Stephen
right?
Nolan. Yeah,
He did
yeah,
that. They became discredited.
yeah,
Organizations left in droves.
including the
Well,
BBC.
it's just popped up with a different name. I think that funding's just been siphoned out to smaller organizations because our council disaffiliated from Stonewall, but they're now affiliated to something called the Navajo Charter Award. It looks like it's exactly the same thing. So
Yeah,
I'm having to ask all the same questions now again about this new organization, you know.
yeah, absolutely. And of
Yeah.
course, the point is that even if, for sake of argument, you have a like the BBC was signatories to the diversity champions scheme,
Yeah.
that Stonewall ran. Even if you were to cut that off, even if you were to disaffiliate, you still you've still indoctrinated your staff in all of those things. It
Yeah.
still pervades. It doesn't just stop because you've cut
No.
your funding to Stonewall. You decided you're having nothing to do with them.
Yeah.
It
And you
still
just
pervades, doesn't it?
yeah, the emotional blackmail is set in place. Everyone's too afraid to put their head above the parapet. There was a guy last week. He was convicted, I think, few weeks ago, and then they said what the fine in court was for putting adult human slash male in something like that, a biological reality or something in his pronouns. Is a local authority officer. 12 grand that guy got fined for doing
Really?
that. So when
Well,
you see people being made examples of like that, no one's speaking up, you know.
no.
I've got enhanced protection because I'm elected. Very few people are in that position. You know, people who are employed aren't protected in that way, as we've seen, you know. So, I mean, obviously Maya Forstater, she did an amazing job on that, but this guy has still been found guilty and fined 12 grand. That's still happened.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like with the council watch thing that I'm doing and the women's work site that I'm setting up and the work around that, the reason that I'm doing it is because I feel like I've got another 2.5 years left as a councillor. I don't know whether I'll stand for election again, but while I still do have some kind of a platform and I'm a little bit protected in terms of my free speech, I need to maximize that because it feels like it's still a critical time. But you know, this election of Donald Trump.
Well, yeah. I mean, I can imagine it would, at least in some small way, give heart to gender critical activists everywhere that he's been elected. I mean, at the end of the day, it shouldn't necessarily need the election of someone like Donald Trump to give that boost to gender critical people. But here we are, you know. But again, we'll see what happens in the coming months when he takes his post in January.
Yeah.
We're running a little low on time, but I just wanted to cover off a couple of little things before we wrap up. Now, you were for a while a member of the Party for Women, weren't you?
Yes.
You take a minute or two just to tell us your experiences being in that party, and the other question I was going to put to you, because I want to move on to the Women's Equality Party as well at the same time, is do you think there's room for a women dedicated political party in this country?
I thought there was, and there might be. It might be that vehicle will be the vehicle that will take off. But I'm not sure because for a number of different reasons. So if it was, I think some of the things that Kelly J, who's the leader of that party, has said is that she wants to sort of emulate what Trump did. And the big difference there is that Farage. The big difference there is that Farage, what he did with Brexit was that he hasn't come from a grassroots he likes to give the impression with the pint in the pub that he's coming from
Yeah,
a grassroots position,
yeah,
and he's the underdog that's managed to fight through against all the odds. And what but he's all over the telly, he's all over the
yeah.
news. He gets to go on Question Time. He'll get covered in his local media. He's got a very high profile and a massive following as a result. She's got a mountain to climb in terms of that. Those doors are never going to be opened for her.
Mm, mm,
So from my point of view, a party that's dedicated to repealing the GRA, which is the main thing, which I totally agree with. I think that has to happen. It's a legal fiction. It's caused no end of problems. We're not going to get to the bottom of this until that's repealed. So I do agree with that. But if you're going to do that, I think the only way to do it is to accept that it's going to be a bit of a long haul. It's going to be a real slog. You're going to have to go at it using all of the experience of anyone you can get your hands on who understands that realm, because obviously the political realm is a very different animal than the activist realm, and the way that you have to approach it in terms of the messaging that you're using, and you have to take account of where the electorate are at and how brainwashed they've been or how oblivious they are. You know, if your leaflet that comes through the door is the very first thing that they've ever heard about this issue, and it's written in a way that activists within the bubble are going to agree with and find a relief to hear, it might not have that impact with people who are looking at this issue for the first time. They might just be like, what the hell? You know, I don't know. So it's kind of like quite subtle things that need to be done in terms of connecting with the electorate. There's things you have to bear in mind as well in terms of the risks that your people on the doorstep are taking. Now, if it's just a protest party and you're wanting to just use it as an excuse because you've got certain rights during an electoral period to get your message out there where you can't be censored in the same way, then that's valid. You know, that's valid. But as an elected councillor, it's not the right place for me because I'm elected and I'm looking to potentially get re-elected. I would like to see more people get elected who are going to stand up and speak the truth. And as a protest party, I think you do have to make adjustments from activism. That obviously is Kelly J's
yeah,
forte, and she's amazingly effective at that. But in terms of building a credible party where you improve on your electoral results with each election and have an upward trajectory, it's a slog. You have to not. I'm not saying you have to compromise, but you've got to work. You've got to build bridges, you know, and you have
mm,
to tailor your messaging to where people are actually at and meet them there. You have to be aware of the fact that you might want to create a splash in an electoral period. You can do it by putting press releases out. There's going to be certain things that they can't clamp you down on. If they've featured other parties, they're going to have to feature your party on their show or in their paper or whatever. But in terms of like hustings and things like that, we've already seen how they can use ways and means to close people out. So you've got to be a bit willing to be flexible and clever. I think Kelly J likes people to come to her in terms of the media and not chase them. But one of your main advantages is that in an electoral period, they have to include you in certain things. So it's a different animal. And I don't know whether the independent candidate who's more, if with it just being also just for women, there's a lot of dads and granddads who really want to get involved and are concerned about this. So whenever we do street turfing, we have a lot of men that come up and say, oh my God, this is awful. Thank you for what you're doing. I really worry about my granddaughters or my daughters or my grandchildren, whatever. So yeah, so I just on a little bit of an assessment, I just felt I'm not sure this is the right vehicle for me. I feel a bit more free being an independent. I like to be more in control of the messaging that I'm putting out. I'm into building bridges. I don't want us all to be
yes,
competing with each other. Everyone's got their
absolutely.
forte, you know, so it's yeah. But I'm
Mm,
sure that she'll do well with it because she's just got such a massive presence, you know, and she does
yeah,
things in a really unique way. So
certainly. Yeah, I mean, I think you used the phrase a protest party, and I think that's always a potential problem. If you, I mean, as correct as your position might be, if you're only a party of protest, that only has a certain amount of legs, doesn't it? It's not going to last forever. It's not in and of itself a foundation to build a successful party on, is it?
no,
I mean, one of the most obvious examples of a protest party was UKIP, wasn't it? Um,
yeah,
it was a party that uh, was pushing for Britain to leave the European Union, and then it obviously become a protest party on Britain to actually leave the European Union when it voted to do it. But it's gone now. All right, it's kind of reformed now after, you know,
Yeah.
a few transformations. But it's that point that you can only maintain a protest party for so long, can't you?
Yeah. Yeah, and also Farage as well. He's an amazing strategist. He knows, he really is in touch with his electorate. He knows that there's a certain level of anger there that he can tap into. And that's going to light a fire. You know, there isn't that much anger about women, A, because people don't know what's going on because it's been suppressed, and B, because we're the underdog. You know, we're the 50% of the global population who are in every sense really
Yeah.
the underdog. So people don't get as fired up about women's issue. Even some of us as women don't get fired up enough about the injustices that affect us ourselves. So she's got a hell of a job to do, really, a hell of a job.
Mm.
But I just think there's room for lots of different approaches, you know. As she said, it's not, she said, I'm never going to get elected. We're probably not going to get, you know, many candidates elected. But if we can get some leaflets out, if we can shake things up, well, you can only shake things up if you're platformed, and your leaflets have to meet people where they're at and not put people at risk. Um, and so I don't know, I wish her well with it, but I just don't feel as if it just doesn't feel as if it's the right fit for me, but it will be for other people, and that's
Yeah,
fine.
I'm sure, and I think one of the things that a party like the Party for Women has to do, even if it, you know, I think Kelly J. Keen's a realist. I think she realises that um, they're not going to have any elected MPs or any elected councillors, perhaps, but it's about having a presence that's enough to push other parties in a certain direction, isn't it? If
Yeah.
you can push or pull someone in your direction, then you've effectively done what you set out to do.
Yeah. 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 He's like, Farage has got the appetite there. He just has to exploit it. Whereas she has to create the appetite, you know, by
Mm,
informing people. It's really hard. It's really hard to do.
yeah.
But yeah, I don't know. I don't know. I'm no expert on these things. You know, I might try to encourage people to stand as independents, and I might hit the wrong chord, or I might not get it right, or it might not make any impact, or I might not even do it. So
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
I don't know.
Well,
Everybody's just in this space doing the best we can
yeah,
in an
exactly.
environment where there's been so much suppression and there's not a huge amount of concern to start with. You know, it's just difficult. You know, we've got to just
Of
keep
course.
trying. So,
Yeah, absolutely.
mm.
And speaking of trying to find a space, one women's party that tried to find a space and has decided to close its doors for good is the Women's Equality Party. For those who may not have heard of them, and you'd be forgiven if you hadn't, um, they were established in 2015 by Sandy Toksvig, amongst other people. It wasn't her on her own. There was other people that founded the party with her. Um, I think at their peak they had something like 8,600 members, and they have decided. I'm trying to remember which way round it was. I don't know whether it's the executive recommended to the members or the members recommended to the executive, but they decided to close their doors and call it a day.
Yeah.
Um, they got apparently 1,700 votes in the general election in July. It's been something of a complete failure, hasn't it? The
My
Women's
God.
Party.
If it's been
What?
going that long, I'd say so. Yeah, you'd expect
Yeah,
better than that, wouldn't you?
yeah, absolutely.
Because I read the article that you sent me, which was Joe Bartosh.
That's right. Yeah.
Um, and the reason that they'd given was that the political landscape has changed, that the Tories have kind of melded with the far right, and Labour don't listen to their own MPs, so they're not likely to ever listen to us. And it's
Mm,
like, can you imagine the suffragettes ever saying, well, we don't really like them, and we think they're a bit mean, so let's just hang up our hats and just go home and give up? And you know, it's
yeah.
like unbelievable,
I mean,
really.
even as a piece of political analysis, it was completely wrong. I mean, no, let's be clear. At what point was we closest to introducing self-identification in this country? It was under Theresa May's premiership.
Yeah.
Theresa May,
Mm,
Conservative MP. Now,
yeah.
if you're telling me that that's the Conservatives melding with the far right, then I have a bridge in London I can tell you,
The
because
only MP
that
really
is
that
ridiculous.
the only MP in London in Labour that isn't has the one who's been least listened to has been Rosie Duffield.
Yes,
The one who's been treated the worst has been Rosie Duffield.
yes.
So if they've got a problem with people not listening to their MPs, it's not women, because she's a woman and she's been treated terribly.
Yeah,
And they oppose her. They oppose her views because they
yeah.
support trans affirmation of children, and they've thrown people out of their party for saying that they don't disagree with trans affirming children. So, I've got this quote here. Their leader in 2019 was Mandu Reid, and she said, "Trans women are women, but they're women amongst a rich tapestry of what it means to be a woman, of which we are all a part." It's like, what the hell?
Mm.
It's like, if we're all a part of a rich tapestry of womanhood, there's no such thing as womanhood, because we're all it. Anyone at any given time, you know, what does
Well,
she
if
mean?
well, it's like if everyone can potentially be a woman, then there's no womanhood, is there? For instance, if everyone's racist, then no one's racist.
Yeah. If you've got a binary and you break down that division wall in between it, you don't have a binary anymore.
No. So there's no
So
point you fighting for their equality.
no, there's no point having it. Maybe that is why. Maybe that is why they've folded.
Maybe it's
Yeah.
it's just sort of disappeared in a puff of logic. If you follow their arguments to its final conclusion, they got to the end and thought, well, that's it. We're gonna have to close our doors. I
I
mean,
think it's
speaking of sorry, I just want to give you a quote from myself. This was from the article that was linked in the one I sent you, and it was an interview with Sandy Toksvig herself,
yeah.
and they were talking about uh, keeping women's safe spaces for women. And Sandy Toksvig responded as such. She said, "I don't get this. I'm in my 45th year in show business, traveling the country touring. I've been to every service station toilet in the country. Every one has a sign up saying male cleaners in attendance. I don't recall anybody saying we need to group up against these male cleaners. Why would someone dress as a woman when they could just pick up a cleansing cloth? If it really bothers you, there's a toilet someplace else. Go there. Shut up. Let's join together and fight stuff that actually needs fighting. Why are they talking about this when women in Afghanistan are not allowed
Mm,
to sing or to look a man in the face? Who
mm.
is benefiting from all this? The patriarchy. It makes me so sad." End quote.
It's interesting, isn't it? So no one in the media would ever get Sandy Toksvig on to ask her what she thinks about women self-selecting out of rape crisis support in Scotland, because they've got a bloke there who says that if women aren't interested in talking to him or another man about their sexual assault or rape, that they need to reframe their trauma. No one ever asks Sandy a difficult question. So she just deflects. She deflects by talking about male cleaners. She deflects by talking about the gender pay gap, childcare, mansplaining and manspreading and things like that. And all the while, we've got like Iman Khalif in the Olympics punching women in the face, and that being, televised as an Olympic sport. We've got men man boob feeding babies. We've got surrogacy taken off, as an income generator. That she's talking about Iran, and yet we've got women who can't access rape support in our own country, and the very definition of being a woman is being eroded from our language and our statute and how we collect statistics. I don't know, maybe they just felt like we've gone so far down the line of being able to ignore these things, and we're not going to be able to ignore them anymore, so we might as well get out quick before we find ourselves in the hot spot. Maybe it was more to do with that, I don't know, but to me it's always just seemed like a very posh, privileged club.
Yeah,
It's not in the real
yeah.
world. She is not in the real world. It's
No, and it hasn't been
shameful.
for a very, very long time. I mean, yeah, I think essentially they as a party ran themselves into a dead end and are basically shutting up shop before
Yeah.
it shut for them. I'm sure it's a very sad day for the Women's Equality Party, but there were quite a few people celebrating their demise on social media. Let's put it that way. But yeah, it's a very, very strange party from the outside looking in. Very strange, and I'm sure it won't be missed.
Mm.
Um, we're almost out of time, but before I go, so we're in an interesting time now. We've got a Labour government, as I said, for about 4 months, and in about 2 months' time, we'll have a new president in the United States, and whilst we're in Britain, it has to be said, whoever's in charge in the United States has an effect on us too. Yeah. So what are your hopes and your expectations and maybe your fears for the coming 12 months or so?
Well, I hope that we're gonna see. I think Elon Musk and Trump have said that you're the media now, haven't they? They've said that on Twitter,
Hmm.
and they've said follow this account for a follow back. So that means that they're amplifying ordinary people's voices who support what they're doing a lot wider, which I think that's a healthy, good thing. Twitter's felt like such a different space since Elon Musk
Yeah.
took it over.
Yeah. Yeah.
Important conversations that need to be had are being had. I don't believe in dampening down the conversations that we don't like. Let's have them out in the open. Let's look at the evidence and argue them out, in the public arena. So I think that I just feel like it's going to be a healthier space. I think that Donald Trump is he's decisive at least, and um, he controls a lot of things through tariffs, doesn't he? So Starmer's got a very different outlook now than he did even just a couple of weeks ago. Obviously, with Kemi Badenoch,
Hmm.
she shoots from the hip. I don't agree with everything she says. Don't have to, do I? You know what I mean? I feel as if she's a conviction politician who says what she actually believes. I don't feel as if she's a puppet who's having her strings pulled to any greater extent than would ever be normal in politics anytime we've ever known.
Yeah. Yeah.
Completely different story with Starmer and with all of the people that are in the upper echelons of the left that I know. And we'll say the left, I mean like the right left. And then in terms of the actual left itself, like Dawn Butler, Richard Bergen, Zara Sultana, all of
Mm.
these
No,
are
nudging it.
heroes. Our heroes, where the hell have they been on child safeguarding, and women's rights? And it feels as if they're on a grift and that they've
They are.
forgotten. Like
Yeah.
we had adulation for those people. It was exciting. I remember those years when I was very naive and I believed that they had a lot of integrity about them, but I don't believe that if they did, they'd have been able to ignore the evidence around the harm of children. And to double down in the way that they have done, to me, they're no better than the Starmers of the world or the Annalise Dodds of the world or anybody else. So I just hope, because Labour, if they're good at anything, they're good at backtracking on things and making it sound as if it was their own idea. So let's hope they just do that. I don't care if none of us get any credit for it. I just would like to see them backtracking soon.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, it was interesting, wasn't it? It was one of the first things that the government announced when they took power in July was that they were going to maintain the ban on puberty blockers for children.
Yes.
Much to the opprobrium of the usual suspects.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, it'll be very interesting to see how things pan out in the coming months. Do you do you think that Kemi Badenoch is a realistic leader of Her Majesty's opposition?
I do. Yeah. I think there's a bit of sexism in the system, with people saying, "Oh, well, that's great," the Conservatives are dead now for a few more years. I think they underestimate her. She was the only one who was willing to speak up as plainly as she did.
Mm,
She didn't go all the way, by any means, but by God, she did a really good job. She was very evidence-based, very clear, very focused, and very courageous in what she did. That
yeah,
bodes well, I think.
yeah, absolutely. Now, what did you make of Dawn Butler's deleted tweet about Kemi Badenoch being the black face of white supremacism?
I mean, Dawn Butler she's part of that Starmer machine. She makes noises, about social justice and things like that, but she's ineffective in terms of pushing for change or looking at policies from any kind of evidence base or coping if anyone actually
Mm,
brings evidence that contradicts her own view. So I think she's hook, line, and sinkered, really. She's just looking to make sure that she can get re-elected. And it's not, I don't think you can call someone racist who's already black themselves, who's calling someone else. It's like the equivalent of saying that someone's an Uncle Tom, isn't it? That's what she's
yeah,
basically saying. It's not racist, but it's schoolyard, it's offensive, it's childish. And people go in with personal attacks when they haven't got any kind of a leg to stand on in policy terms, I always find.
yeah,
So
that's
I
right.
just think she's beyond contempt in the way that she's behaved. It's not good.
Yeah, she's I have had the mispleasure of meeting her. I'm going back to about 20. It was 2020 when she was running for deputy leader
Mm,
of the Labour Party, and she is one of the most stupid people I've ever come across. In fact, most
Right.
of the people who I would rank in my top 10 of most stupid people I've ever come across were Labour MPs. They really are.
Yeah.
Cool. But no,
Yeah.
the only thing I do, like you mentioned about the there is a sort of a vein of misogyny within the left. I think there's a vein of racism in the left as well. Certainly in the modern left. I've said myself on social media, the only thing that the modern left hate more than a conservative is a black conservative.
That's true as well. Yeah. Mm,
They feel absolutely betrayed that
mm,
a person of color, could put a blue rosette on
mm, mm.
make an argument for people to vote Conservative. And it's not just Kemi Badenoch either. My MP is James Cleverly
Mm.
in the Braintree constituency, and he takes occasional pelters from the left, and some of it I believe is racially motivated.
Yeah.
Um, it's
Yeah.
unforgivable to certain sections of the left that a black person should become conservative.
Yeah. It's very unhealthy as well, I think, if you've got a particular political outlook, to just make the arrogant assumption that there's nothing you can ever learn from anyone else's experience or opinion, you know. I mean, I've never been a fan of sort of what was called the middle way, because I just felt like it was a complete betrayal, you know,
Mm,
of working class people.
yeah.
But I think I've been unhealthily fixed in my life. When I was a member of the Labour Party, when we were all excited and felt like we had a chance, you know, of being in government, I think I was very, very fixed at that point, and I had been through for my whole life. What's happened is what's happened with suppression of freedom of speech and all of the abuse that's happened is it's made me see people who I didn't really regard as fully human even beforehand as human. We all come to this with our own sort of life background and experiences, and I hope that I'd never be that arrogant again. And I still see a lot of that arrogance on what that group of people that call themselves the left. Yeah. So
Yeah, absolutely.
yeah.
Absolutely. Well, our time is up, Mandy, but before we say goodbye, for those watching who would like to follow you more on social media, where can they find you?
Well, if you look up Council Watch Cheshire, Council Watch Quack, I think it is, on CWAC, so that's Cheshire West Manchester, on YouTube. I'll be bobbing some content on there. I'm going to do a 7-parter on what happened at the Story House, because there's footage of us kind of
Yeah, that'd be
interacting
good.
with the
Yeah,
police
excellent.
and stuff that I've never had time to go back to, but actually it's really useful to analyze it at this point. So I'm going to do that. And then I've got footage of meetings and motions that we've taken and different examples of them being undemocratic. And then if you look out on there and on my councillor Facebook page, also my Twitter is at Mandy Clare Turf. Turf is capitals, TERF.
TERF. Yeah.
Yeah. And my Facebook is councillor CLLR Mandy Clare, Winsford Dean, DENE. Follow me on any of those, and I'll put updates on what I'm doing with the new project we've got in the offing, which is called Women's Work. And that's a collaborative thing. I'm hoping that there'll be lots of people will become involved in it. Got lots of ideas of what I want to drop on there. And the idea with that is not to take over anyone else's territory. It's to kind of just try and throw something additional into the mix. We need more noise on this issue, not less. So
Yeah, absolutely. Mandy, thank you very much for joining me, and hopefully I'll speak to you again soon.
thank you.
Thank you.